Welcome, everyone. Hello, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to How Voter Suppression Works Today and What We Can Do About It. I'm Ann Toback, the CEO of the Workers' Circle, and we're thrilled to be co-hosting tonight's program with the Center for Common Ground and 47 co-sponsors. We're so glad that you've joined us, and we invite you to drop where you're zooming from into the chat. The Workers' Circle is a Jewish social justice organization that was founded by Eastern European Jewish immigrants fleeing autocracy and persecution and seeking democratic freedoms 123 years ago. That history drives our work for an inclusive democracy and human equality today. The Center for Common Ground educates and empowers voters of color in voter-suppressed states and works to build a democracy that prioritizes the voices of all people. We want to express our great thanks and solidarity to the 47 co-sponsoring organizations of tonight's program. There's going to be a list in the chat of all 47 co-sponsors. We know that together we can strengthen our democracy, fight back against voter suppression, and get our country moving in the right direction. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Noelle D'Amico, the Workers' Circle Director of Social Justice, who's going to introduce the themes of our program and our incredible esteemed panelists. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Anne, and thank you everyone for being with us. I want to do just a quick check on ASL interpretation. I saw in the chat that there was difficulty seeing. Someone was not in the frame. Okay. Welcome. If that continues, let us know and we'll do our best to correct. Friends, when we hear the words voter suppression, our first thoughts may go back to the era of Jim Crow, to poll taxes, arbitrary administrative procedures, and violence that stopped Black Americans from voting. But today, 58 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and 10 years after the Supreme Court cut the heart out of that legislation, there are new approaches to voter suppression that are disenfranchising millions of voters of color, young people, and poor people. Andrea Miller describes our era of voter suppression as the era of James P. Crow Esquire, because these new sophisticated legal techniques still seek to disenfranchise voters of color by design. Some types of voter suppression are clear for the eye to see. Others are embedded deep in processes or administrative choices that are harder to discern, but still disenfranchise. Tonight, our panelists will walk you through different forms of 21st century voter suppression and how we can defeat these attacks on our democracy together. This evening's program is structured to allow maximum opportunity for interaction. We'll be taking your questions all night via the chat. Throughout the program, just drop them into the chat. We will also have a dedicated time at the very end of the program for additional Q&A. We are absolutely fortunate to have a superb panel of frontline experts tonight. Andrea Miller is the founding board member of the Center for Common Ground and will begin by giving us an overview of 21st century voter suppression. Richard Walker is the founder and CEO of Bridging the Gap in Virginia. Richard will discuss how individuals are targeted for voter suppression and the fight to restore voting rights to returning citizens. Evan Milligan is executive director of Alabama Forward and the named plaintiff in Allen v. Milligan, originally Merrill v. Milligan, which was decided by the Supreme Court in June of 2023. He and other plaintiffs sued in federal court to require Alabama to draw a second majority Black congressional district under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and won. Evan will discuss the courts and voter suppression. Following Evan, Carol Blackman, who is the state senior organizing manager in Mississippi for Black Voters Matter, will zero us in on Mississippi and discuss redistricting and voter suppression. And finally, because this really is about 21st century voter suppression, Lulu Friesdat, a thought leader, documentary filmmaker, TEDx speaker, who co-founded Smart Elections, will discuss voter suppression by technology. We now turn to Andrea Miller from the Center for Common Ground for an overview of what voter suppression looks like today.
Thank you very, very much, Noelle. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And I really wish in the 21st century, voter suppression was actually beginning to disappear. But as Noelle said, it's beginning to move into the background where instead of people obviously trying to block people from going in to vote, we actually have people being blocked administratively and legally. Let's take a look at what voter suppression looks like in the 21st century. So when we take a look, we've got an interesting challenge in the 21st century. The right wing is still trying to, and is still being very successful, getting people all enthusiastic about the big lie, telling people 2020 election was stolen, and we really are going to need to enforce and have stricter voting rules. We had federal legislation in place that suddenly wasn't renewed. And all of our efforts at the federal level have so far failed. And even right now, passage is looking very doubtful in the United States House. We are seeing a lack of enthusiasm among progressive activists. Frankly, I think they're just getting tired and worn out. This has been a huge fight. People who are candidates are volunteers with the Democratic Party are now very, very concerned about the digital infrastructure of the party because it is no longer American owned. And we know that the right wing is investing very heavily in community centers in Black and brown communities. I'm going to address the data security concerns very, very quickly in the event people were not aware of them. Most people know that the Democratic Party utilizes a product that was called NGP Van, now Every Action. And in August of 2021, it was sold to Apex Partners, which is a British venture capital firm. Right now, it looks as though the product is owned by the Saudis. Because we want to empower voters, and we know that good information on voters is really important. We made an investment and bought our own voter file system so that it was, number one, American owned, and number two, was constantly being updated. So again, one of the ways that we could see suppressing the vote would be the failure of the technology platform used by one of the major political parties. So we work to make sure there will still be something that can keep running. We have seen the courts come down on the side of voter suppression. The Eighth Circuit Court ruled that private plaintiffs cannot sue under Section 8 or Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, the states that are in the Eighth Circuit, this is not all 50 states, are Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And yes, if you're going, wait a minute, what about Allen versus v. Milligan? Yes, this case is a direct response to Allen v. Milligan. If the right wing takes over all the attorney general's offices and ultimately the DOJ, then if they are the only ones who can bring suit under the Voting Rights Act, there will be no additional suits coming under the Voting Rights Act. As I said, the suppression has moved into the background and into the shadows, and it is under cover of law. Now, federal legislation. There are several bills currently in Congress right now that are definitely voter suppression bills. We have one bill that would completely overturn the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. There are several bills that would require proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. Now, this next one is a really strange one. There is a bill that would return the city of Washington, D.C. to the state of Maryland. Again, making sure that we would not have a 51st state in the city of Washington, D.C. that would most probably be extremely progressive. We also see bills that would prohibit agencies from having agreements with non-government organizations and other third-party groups for voter registration and voter mobilization effort. We have bills that say if you are going to vote by mail, you must provide proof of citizenship. And we are also seeing states lead ERIC, and we are also seeing on the federal level the attempt to eliminate reliance on the United States Postal Service for address verification. And since it is the Postal Service that is in charge of addresses, it gets very, very interesting as to what the replacement will be. Now, at the state level, in 2023, that is this year, 325 restrictive laws were introduced. 17 of those laws have actually been passed in 14 states. We saw new photo ID laws. We saw photo ID laws become stricter. We saw more states saying student IDs would not be sufficient to vote. We saw election interference laws where 81 laws were introduced in 23 states, and they managed to pass 7 bills in 6 states. We still, in the 21st century, have felony disenfranchisement. We also see many states, especially the southern ones and some of our western ones, indulging in voter purges that are legally classified as file maintenance. And we've seen several states introduce laws that would prohibit assisting voters with filling out their ballot, delivering their ballot, all manner of various things. Now, I'm going rather quickly because I want you to be able to hear from the people who will give you a lot of detail. Now, what are the states doing? Well, they are continuing to consolidate and close polling locations. And what we saw in Virginia in 2019, they closed polling places in the Black areas of Chesterfield County, the third largest county in Virginia. And there was a sign on the door that said closed, but there was no sign that said where it went. And if you used to vote here, this is where you vote now. We've got states banning the use of drop boxes, or states like Texas that says, well, all right, every county will have one drop box. We have instances of states with same day registration not counting ballots that were cast, even when voters have shown up and provided the appropriate ID. We have also seen a shortened time frame for the return of vote by mail ballots. Several states previously allowed your vote by mail ballot to arrive on Friday, the week of the election. A number of states have now said, nope, your ballot has got to be there by 7 p.m. on election day. Otherwise, it will not count. We are also seeing states like Ohio work to make it much harder for citizens to initiate ballot measures. And on the map, you can see the states that have introduced varying forms of these restrictive laws that really impact individual voters. Now, election interference laws are normally at the administrative and procedural level. In Harris County, Texas, the largest county in Texas, the politically appointed Secretary of State now has complete oversight over Harris County elections. In North Carolina, the Board of Elections for each county is now an equal number of Democrats and an equal number of Republicans. And you're going, well, that sounds fair. There is no procedure for breaking a tie. And if there is a tie and they are working out what early voting locations are we going to open, say in Mecklenburg County, the largest county in North Carolina, if there is a tie and they cannot agree, there will only be one early voting location for that county. Now, this is truly 21st century suppression by technology, and Lulu is really going to dive deeply into item 2. Early voting. For those of us who are very privileged, we have computers, we have cell phones, we know how to use the internet. Early voting information is only available to people who can go on the internet and look it up. They don't mail you a card or provide anything that tells you this is where your early voting locations are. There are no public service announcements that must run on television saying these are the early voting locations available to you in your county, and this is the date and time when they are open. So that is something that we provide in all of our phone banks, all of our text banks. And when we write postcards, we give voters the phone number of each individual county registrar. Now, there are 133 counties in Virginia. If we work in Texas again, there are 276 counties in Texas. So that's a lot of administrative work on our part to make up for something that is not provided to vulnerable voters. And then the last suppression by technology, voting machines. So they've got these new snazzy voting machines that produce a receipt with a barcode. Well, the last time I looked, most humans don't read barcode. We also know that, as my mother used to say, anything made by man breaks. It's not a question of if, it's just a matter of when. Well, when you're dealing with relatively sophisticated voting machines, when they break during an election, especially in states where there's only one day to vote, that can produce incredibly long lines, which in and of themselves are very disenfranchising. And then finally, one of the ugliest and worst holdovers from Jim Crow, felony disenfranchisement. And I'm going to use my own state of Virginia. There are currently 3 states left where basically there is permanent lifetime disenfranchisement for a past felony conviction unless and until you are granted restoration of your rights by the governor. Now, in Virginia, back in 2009, a group of us activists managed to get the Republican Virginia governor to develop a process where when you requested to have your rights restored, you knew basically within 60 days whether you were a yay or a nay. Fast forward to 2023, and the current governor has decided, no, I'm not going to do automatic restoration of rights. I'm the governor, and I make all the rules regarding voter disenfranchisement. And I think we're going to go back to the 1902 rules that basically says, hey, if and when I, as governor, feel like restoring your right to vote, I will. If I don't, you won't be restored. And in this last election, we saw a number of voters who had previously had their rights restored under previous governors suddenly discover when they went to vote that their restoration rights had been revoked. So there's a lot of work to be done in a state like Virginia. We are working on a constitutional amendment, but that is going to take a lot of time. Our next speaker, and I am going to call a point of privilege because I've known him for years, is Richard Walker of Bridging the Gap. There is no one who has been a more fierce warrior for restoration of voting rights and ensuring that people with felony convictions in their past will have an opportunity to restart and regain their rightful place in society. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Richard Walker.
Thank you so much, Andrea. This is Noelle D'Amico saying that we're going to have Andrea answer some of your questions in the chat and also in Q&A and move directly on to Richard. Richard, we are delighted you're here. Please turn on your cameras and we'll spotlight you and get going.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. And welcome. This has been interesting so far. I'm impressed with the panelists that I'll be sharing the screen with. As my bio indicated, Richard Walker, when I came home from incarceration in 2005, I saw that I wanted to go vote, and they told me that my civil rights had been taken away from me as a direct result of my felony conviction. I became angry because my family had insisted that we vote at the age of 18. You know, they took us to the polling places when they were voting so that we would be aware and understand, you know, that voting was an obligation beyond a right, that it was necessary because of what we fought for in order to get the right to vote. So I have been diligent in voting ever since I was 18. when I was released and I found out that my rights had been taken, I questioned. I did my homework. And then initially, I thought it was just like plain old Republican protectionism, that they can secure their seats in the General Assembly. But then when I found out otherwise, that, this was legislation that has been in existence in the Commonwealth of Virginia for over 150 years. And I'm like, whoa, so I got involved and found out that in 1902, in 1902, there was a legislator that stood up in the first Constitution of the Virginia. It was a convention they held, and he indicated that by disenfranchising individuals that commit crimes is a way to keep the darkies out of our government. From that point forward, I became angrier. And that's when I started advocating for change. That's when I started, connecting the folk that were of like minds to help get rid of this piece of legislation, as far as I'm concerned, that was racist and it should have been repealed. I've been, since 2012, 2013, several groups, several organizations. We've been pushing for automatic restoration of constitutional amendment, and we were excited. We've gotten it all the way to the point in 2017, 18, where we had it gone through the General Assembly on 2 readings. Then once we got in, we couldn't get it passed. And then as late as 2021, it never even made it into the courts of justice. They denied it to even been brought into the General Assembly as a piece of legislation. As Andrea indicated and showed you on the slide, already, and we've just gotten through to elections a month or so ago. We have mirror bills both in the House as well as in the Senate, HJ1 and SJ2. And these are both for the constitutional amendment to go through this year. And when you're looking at HJ1, or is it HJ2? I'm sorry, HJ2, there were 31 delegates that signed on to patron this bill. And then on the Senate side, Senator Mamie Locke has been pushing this legislation for the past 5 years. So we're excited of where it's at now, and believing and confident that it'll get through the first reading in this session for 2024. I'm involved in a lawsuit currently right now. Let me back up. The previous governors, I was a part of the stakeholders advisory group for both Governor McAuliffe and Governor Northam. My rights were restored in 2012 by Governor McDonnell, the Republican governor. And in that process, he has streamlined the paperwork. I'm probably one of the last ones that had to fill out 13 pieces of paper to submit. And that was in 2010, where I was denied. But then in 2012, that's when they called me down to the office of the Secretary of the Commonwealth and handed me the seal, raised seal with the governor's signature on it, to let me know that my rights had been restored. And I've been on a mission ever since. I've assisted over 10,000 plus people to get their rights restored. I've been advocating to change the legislation. When folks see me in the General Assembly, depending on their shade of their skin, they might turn 3 shades red, because they know I'm coming there, and I'm coming there to advocate, and we continue to do that, and that is essential for change. So as a result of that, both Governor McAuliffe, he pretty much did an automatic restoration of rights, but then the Republicans took him to court and they said he had to do it individually. So he figured out a way to do it individually. He restored the rights over 200,000 individuals. Then when Governor Northam came into office, he restored the rights of over 69,000 individuals. So they made progress to help change, and they did not mince their words when they talked about that we will no longer allow Jim Crow to permeate in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that's what they stood on, and would justify them restoring the rights of so many individuals. And there still are, over 100,000+ individuals that, as a result of those two governors, they're not aware that their rights had been restored. So there are countless others that still need to be reached to let them know their rights were restored back in 2016 or 2018, when either one of those governors were in office. So my work is still undone, to continue to help individuals to check their statuses, to let them know whether or not their rights have been restored. If they hadn't been restored, and I need to go on to talk about what Governor Youngkin has done since he's been in office. We requested a meeting with the Secretary of the Commonwealth under Governor Youngkin, and she pretty much stonewalled us every time we attempted to have an appointment and sit down, because there had been no direct outline, no direct indication of what the process was or to be under this new administration under Governor Youngkin. So it took us all the way through until March, April, before they came out and said that we're reverting back to completing individual applications, and we will review them one by one and make a determination whether they would be allowed to have their rights restored. He made a statement that, to this end, it rings real angry in my brain, where he said, I might show some grace to individuals to get their rights restored. And I'm saying to myself, if you look up the word grace, it says mostly given by God. So he had pretty much put himself in a position as if he is a God in order to give anybody to restore their rights. Please look that up, and you'll see articles on it. The NAACP has since had a FOIA request on them, and they had a protest. We had several protests here in the city of Richmond, right there in the Capitol, near the Capitol building, since Youngkin's been in office. So at this point, we're holding him accountable because he still has yet to produce a process. I'm sitting here with one of the applications here, and what he added to this new application was he asked that were your crime that you committed violent or nonviolent on that application. He asked, have you paid your fines and fees? He asked that are you a U.S. citizen? And it's just not like the others. Even when I applied, those questions were not even on the application that I had to do. So he's taken it upon himself to determine what criteria he wants to establish in order to enfranchise individuals, allow them to vote. All right, let's move forward. Recently, we just had the June primary. There were initially stated that there were 17,000 individuals that were removed from the voting list right prior to the primary, June the 6th, 7th, somewhere thereabouts. So once they did that, they said an individual that they felt that 17,000 individuals had recommitted a new crime and had lost their rights that were previously given to them by former governors. Then they came out and said, nope, there were 3,000 individuals that recommitted a new crime and that they were removed from. Then they ultimately said, no, there were 300 people that they restored back onto the voting list prior to the primary. So throughout that whole process, I said it then and I say it now, I didn't trust them then and I don't trust them now. I don't think those numbers are accurate. I still believe individuals were disenfranchised from voting in this past elections, and that we're still going to continue to hold them accountable. I get impassioned about this because I can't see how a governor can deny individuals the constitutional right to vote. You know, this is voter suppression beyond. You know, this is taking it back. And I wasn't living back then at that time during Jim Crow era, but I know the pain that the folk went through in order for us to have the privileges, the right to vote now. And who in the heck is the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia to take that away from you? You know, so yeah, we're fighting on a regular basis. Now, I'm currently involved in a lawsuit. There were 2 pending lawsuits against the governor. One was for the mere fact that he did not outline any of his processes for restoring individuals' rights, and that came through the ACLU and one of my partnering organizations, No Left Turns. Unfortunately, the decision they had was given over a week ago, right before Thanksgiving, because they charged and filed it against the governor that he took it upon himself to dictate how he was going to not allow individuals to vote. The lawsuit that I'm involved with involves the Readmission Act of 1870, which basically was after the Civil War, where they indicated individuals that from the Confederacy wanted to get into the Union. So they were allowing them through this Readmission Act. All right. But they did say that you could not, that you had to allow Negroes back then the opportunity to vote as well. That you could not change that congressional edict from the Congress, that act, through the Commonwealth of Virginia. But Virginia took it upon themselves to do it. What they called was they called it a common law crime. A common law crime was considered anything that was malicious or sexual assault or murder, right? So that they did not have the right to change that to make it inclusive of any crime, that they disenfranchised individuals. So that's the lawsuit that I'm involved in. We had arguments right before Thanksgiving, the day before. And so we're still pending on the interpretation or the reading or the response from the judge. We're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to move forward. We're going to continue to hold this administration accountable for that voter suppression, the disenfranchising of individuals. My phone is continuously ringing on a daily basis and walking folk through the process of applying or checking their status for their rights. You can find a lot of that information on the Secretary of the Commonwealth website on how to assist individuals with getting their rights restored. I see that my time is up. Thank you.
Richard, thank you so much for your constancy of your work, the strength of your work, and your refusal to stand down when the governor has taken it upon himself to make this process something that is unintelligible and unnavigatable. I have one question for you, Richard, and that is, 20 years ago, the question of reenfranchisement of returning citizens was really not in the public consciousness. What do you think put it there?
When folk found out that they couldn't vote, they were denied the right to vote when they got to the polling places, and that was who can count the numbers, so that entwined with other areas or other rhymes, reasons, and rationales of voter suppression was all incumbent together. So the talking about restoration rights or losing their rights as a direct result of being disenfranchised, that was a part of a mixture of other means and measures to disenfranchise African Americans, period.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. And I think it's significant that what you said, it's people went to vote and found they couldn't vote. In other words, the people that were directly affected, directly impacted, began themselves to say, this has to change, and this has to change now. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're going to have the opportunity to have more questions. Remember to put your questions in the Q&A and in the chat. I'm going to move now to turn to Evan Milligan, the named plaintiff in Allen v. Milligan. Evan, we are so delighted that you're here. Talk to us about the courts and voter suppression and how things are with Alabama Forward. Give us an update, Evan.
Thank you so much, and good evening to everyone. I'll start by telling you 3 things about me that you may not know. One, my wife and I have 2 small children, a 3-year-old son, a 6-year-old daughter, and when it comes to evening presentations, I literally have to hide in my car or if I can't get away from the house in order to avoid them making a presentation that overpowers mine. So please forgive me for being here in the car. I hope you can still see me, but I know some of you relate to that. The second thing, I'm 6'7". I know you can't tell that from looking at me in this window, but yes, I'm 6'7", and I've never been good at basketball beyond the occasional surprise in a backyard game. So that means that I'm often, particularly in a sports, not good in basketball or football. So this is a heavy sports state, especially football. That's usually the first question people ask me, even if they don't know my name. And I'm often both disappointing people, but also surprising them. And I want you to keep that in mind when you think about some themes of our case. And then third, this is the first time in my life where I've heard my family's last name pronounced correctly so often. Growing up here in Montgomery, we would call it everything from Michelin to Michelin to McAllen to, like, people would just look at the name and come up with whatever variety that they wanted to express. But the most popular was Mulligan, and I heard that so often that I often, would wonder what it meant when people heard other people using the term. And some of you who golf know that a mulligan is if you agree to you agree to give a certain number of do-overs per game that don't count against you. So, thinking about the disappointment and being unexpected and thinking about that term, I want you all as a community to help define the meaning of this Milligan case. I'll tell you a little bit about what it's meant to me, but this is not a case that's owned by me or my co-plaintiffs. So many of you gave your prayers, your thoughts, your good energy to this case, to so many others emerging from the voting rights movements around the country, to plaintiffs like us. And as Andrea mentioned, we've reached this point that we knew was coming, where we'll very likely see a case emerge and go before the Supreme Court that decides if plaintiffs like us can even file these suits. You may have read in that dissent, I believe it's from the Eighth Circuit, where the one dissenting judge writes that in the last 40 years of Section 2 cases, there have been 182 successful outcomes. While for plaintiffs bringing a Section 2 claim, only 15 of those were brought um, with the Department of Justice involved of the Section 2 cases. So over 90% of those cases were brought by the plaintiffs and not by the Department of Justice. So what's happening is, if and when that case is heard by the Supreme Court, if this window is closed, it closes a window on a significant one of the last real remaining avenues for federal protection, particularly in terms of state-based, state-driven voter rights subversion. So we have to figure out what if that's on the horizon. What does this case mean now? Is this just a little moment where we got patted on the back, or a nice win to keep us placated? Is this a moment for us to suck our teeth later in a few years and say, "See, I knew we shouldn't have celebrated then"? Is that what this is? When we started Alabama Forward in 2020, we were looking at pro Georgia at Blueprint, North Carolina, at other State Voices members, the Power Coalition in Louisiana, the Florida State Voices chapter. We were looking at these groups as elder siblings, wanting to model our work in a way that would maximize the collective impact all of our individual member groups have here in Alabama with regards to voter engagement, voter registration, voter mobilization, voting rights protection, and then more importantly, building an organic and authentic pro-democracy culture here in our state. And we knew we had at least 30 years of work cut out for us. We've actually plotted our work against, looking at what do we do between now and 2051 to move the needle in terms of who's showing up in our, to vote on election day, but more importantly, who's showing up every day to civic engagement, volunteer, and leadership development activities in our communities. And it's taken, it's been a unique effort. It's taken a lot of collective goodwill for us to figure out our sub-grant system at the same time as we're figuring out programming, at the same time as we're trying to hire and train staff. And then lo and behold, in the midst of all of that, in 2021, our members said, we also want to be very focused on redistricting this year. And that's what our network did. We started meeting twice a month, circulating some of those same briefing materials that a lot of you did in your state coalitions around training opportunities, learning how to use Dave's redistricting and Maptitude, so that our community members had the funding and information and language that they could understand to know why redistricting and the release of the census data mattered, and how it could shape their lives and their voting options. We did that work for most of the year. Towards the end of the year, there was a sub-coalition within our group that included LDF and several of my co-plaintiffs that knew they wanted to bring the argument that unless the state of Alabama created a second opportunity district for Black Alabamians, the state would run, because of our population change. 27% of our population is Black, but we only had 14% of our congressional districts featuring a majority Black voting age population. So bringing the Section 2 claim, satisfying all of that group argued on the front end, look, state of Alabama, please, let's avoid litigation. We can do this the right way. Embrace where the law is, create this district, and then we move on. The state refused, we sued. You all know the story that ultimately went to the Supreme Court. The lower court's decision was affirmed. We won at the Supreme Court, unexpected. And that case comes back home only to find that the state legislature is refusing to actually enforce, to carry out the court's orders. So we go back to federal court and again go through the same roller coaster cycle to ultimately win. And yes, we did secure that second opportunity district. We now have 21 candidates running. We have candidates on the ballot who are going to excite Black Alabamians and communities here who have not been excited to vote or connect with a congressional election in this part of the state in years, if ever. So this is a historic opportunity. And at the same time, a few weeks ago, we get this verdict out of the Court of Appeals in the Eighth Circuit that brings right into center mass of the target this question of whether people can even do what we did moving forward. And I just hope that you moving into this next year, I know there are so many things happening right now, working to tear our coalitions apart, to exhaust us, to pit us against each other. I hope that you will dig in and find reasons to hope that there might be some possibility for another Milligan. We won't call it a mulligan. We can call it, you can call it what you want to call it, a miracle, a magic, a movement moment. Please keep the door open in your heart and in your coalitions for the possibility of that work. And I thank you for allowing me to speak with you today.
Evan, thank you so much. You're such an inspiration. And yes, we have to keep hoping and keep working and not give up. And we know from your experience that every time we make an advance, there's going to come a pushback. And the lesson here is to be ready for that, and to continue to push. Evan, I just wanted to ask you, with your work with the Supreme Court, having been through this, is there anything that you've taken away from that experience that you want us to keep in mind, not only for the case that you've pursued, but for other voting rights cases as they come forward?
Well, it goes back to staying hopeful and really understanding the scope and the scale of the threats posed against us. I think sometimes we tend to want to characterize some of our anti-democratic and pro-authoritarian neighbors in this country and mischaracterize them as being, somehow less intelligent or making these decisions based on impulse and fear only. And though, I'm sure that's true for some people, but when we do that, I think it sometimes lets us off the hook for the amount of work that we need to do and the type of grace we need to be willing to extend to each other to build a ground force and to build the sort of momentum that continues to invite people in. The Leonard Leo Network, the Harold Crow Network, you'll see the reporting that comes out in Politico this week, or the one that already has come out. They are intelligent, they're well funded, they are committed to figuring out ways of working across significant differences, personal and business wise, and they're not playing. And I think we have to take that cold shower over this break and really come back at the top of the year, looking at our destiny squarely and understand that this is actually the moment that could decide when our country, tilts into full authoritarianism, or if we make a leap into something that's more multicultural and democratic. And we can decide that with the beauty and the hope and the dedication and the grit of the people on this phone call and the people that we work with every day. I think if we look at that realistically, it might inspire us to think of some coalitions and ideas more creatively, maybe than we even have done to date.
Evan, thank you so much. We certainly will do that. Let me turn now to Carol Blackman, Senior State Organizing Manager for Black Voters Matter in Mississippi. Carol, we're so glad you're with us. Zero us in on Mississippi, discuss redistricting and voter suppression. The floor is yours.
Guess it might help to unmute myself. Thank you, Noel, and thank the group for having me. Black Voters Matter is happy to be one of the co-sponsors for this wonderful event this evening. And I just want to say that I am the Senior State Organizing Manager for Black Voters Matter here in Mississippi. And for those who may not know, Black Voters Matter is a national nonprofit organization that aims to increase power in marginalized, predominantly Black communities. We believe that effective voting allows a community to determine its own destiny. And here in Mississippi, we have just over 40 partner organizations that we work with who actually help to add legs to the ground here in the state. And Black Voters Matter also is engaged in work across 27 states here in the country. So I just want to do a shameless plug that I think I always do. I registered to vote when I was 17 because I was in the window where I could register because I would turn 18 in 2 months. So I had heard a lot about voting, the importance of it, and listened to stories that my grandmother, the conversations between my grandmother and my father. And they always talked about, she always had ideas about how to get a history book to actually learn the preamble and other pieces of the Mississippi State Constitution. So this one day in particular, I remember my sister was in the 6th grade and my grandmother proposed to my dad that they would take her history book, act like it was stolen, pay for it so that she could get another one. And my grandmother could get to study the book to learn whatever she could glean for when she went back to take the poll test, which was required during that time in the late 60s. So then I learned, I'm fast forwarding here, then I learned about 15, 20 years ago that my grandmother was actually listed in the Sovereignty Commission files in the state of Mississippi for attempting to register to vote. And the Sovereignty Commission files was one of those Jim Crow era state-funded organizations that actually tracked Black people who tried to vote and white people who tried to help them. So then last year, I wondered what year she was listed and all that. So I went to look again and discovered that she was listed twice. So that's part of my legacy and commitment to voting. And I'm still surprised to be here in this world representing an organization called Black Voters Matter and working with communities to build capacity within other nonprofit groups to assist them with learning the tools, having the resources necessary to actually promote the vote in our areas. So in this year's general election on November 7th, there were multiple precincts across the day here in Hinds County. And I say here in Hinds County, I'm not just in Mississippi, I live in Hinds County. So lucky for me and the folk who voted my precinct, we didn't have one of those problems. But Black Voters Matter executive staff was on board with us that day, had brought the Blackest Bus in America here to Mississippi. So we were touring around. We had been on the road in Mississippi for a few days, but we brought the bus to Hinds County for election day. So we were receiving calls from the election protection hotline individuals who are partners for us. And so our first stop was at a precinct in a college community where Tougaloo College is held, where there were technical issues with the polls being open that day because some of the equipment didn't work properly. But that was resolved after about an hour. And then we heard of a few other things. Lo and behold, by mid-afternoon, we started to hear that there were issues with ballots running out in some of the precincts across the county. And there are more than 100 precincts here in our county. So in total, there were 9 precincts that had ballot shortages. The circuit clerk's office worked diligently, I understand, to try and get those ballots replenished. There were support from law enforcement who was actually delivering ballots to precincts to try and ensure that the voting process could continue. There were people who were engaged with election protection. Of course, election protection, that's legal, right? So there were some of the allied partners like Mississippi Center for Justice, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Legal Defense Fund, who was actually engaging with us across the day, who filed to have the polls remain open later in the day after the polls were slated to close at 7. in Mississippi, the polls are open from 7 to 7 on election day, one day. We also do not have early voting because, Andrea, we have the 1 day vote, other than absentee voting. And with absentee voting, you have to have an excuse or be 65 or older. And so that process was also under attack because there was an absentee harvesting bill that was submitted into our state legislature this year that a judge intervened on and did not allow to actually take place the way that it was intended. And so as it turned out, we work with our partners to actually try to get folk the resources they needed to stay in line at the polls. The polls were now staying open to 8. Our executive director, who lives in Georgia, had been around a few times in Georgia when there were heavy lines nearing closing time at on voting day. So he said, we are ordering food so that we can provide some sustenance to folks so that they would be more willing to stay in line. So we ended up ordering 200 meals and untold numbers of pizzas. So we visited at least 6 of those precincts, provided them with hot food, pizza or chicken, and a chicken meal. And we spent the time with them until the polls closed at 8. We were rolling from precinct to precinct. At that point, we had food left, so we were able to take some of that food to the Hinds County Courthouse, where our resolution committee and election commission members and other volunteers and staff were on hand, but were unable to leave the polls, to leave their post at the courthouse because of the important work that they had to do. Unlike, I know people heard about this around the country, and I want to say, unlike our Secretary of State, Michael Watson has been saying, there were election day issues across the state. He has said that there was only one county of the 82 counties that we have, which is Hinds County, that had any kinds of problems. Recently, we learned that Congressman Brian Steele has sent a letter to the Hinds County election commissioners, which has us actually contemplating what that may be all about. In the letter, he mentioned federal elections that are coming up in 2024. So we don't want them engaging here in Mississippi in our local election process. And one other thing I want to add is Hinds County is the blackest county here in the state, and it's also the most populated. We have about 217,000 people. It's 73% Black. Medium income is about 48,000. Mississippi has also increased efforts to do more voter purging, even if folk are sent they're doing voter purging if people don't show up when they are supposed to go to court as jurors. And also our state legislature has stripped some of the voting power from people here in the county by passing something that we call the Capital City Improvement District legislation that allows for the appointment of judges here in the county where we will not be able to vote on them. Then there was also legislation to strip freedom of speech from people in Hinds County, preventing us from doing protests on public grounds of state-owned property.
Well,
And
Carol, oh, I'm
my
so
time is
sorry.
up,
The time is up.
and I
And
was worried. I was like, you can't talk that long. But yes, okay, Noel.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but there was one question from the chat that I wanted to make sure you saw. And one person asked, do you think there was direct targeting of the Black counties for ballots that ran out, or was it a general problem with many precincts, both white and Black? What do you think?
Well, I will say here in the county, there were mixed precincts. We saw that when we were on site visiting those precincts. We don't know really what happened. We're trying to get to the bottom of that. The election commissioners have said that the number of split voting precincts that we have since the 2022 redistricting posed additional challenges for them because they weren't fully trained on how to address those issues.
Oh
and
my, aren't they
yes,
responsible for being trained? Aren't they responsible for having enough ballots?
the
The answer is
Secretary
yes.
of State, yeah, should train them to do all that, have them know how many ballots. We understand that some people actually received the wrong ballots in those split precincts because there were candidates for one precinct, for one portion of the precinct, who were not candidates for the rest of it.
Oh my goodness, Carol, you're just giving us exhibit A of really administrative incompetence that ends up disenfranchising people. Thank you so much for that quick look. I know there's so much more to say about Mississippi, but thank you very, very much, Carol.
Thank
I
you.
now want to turn to Lulu Freestad, a thought leader, a documentary filmmaker, TEDx speaker, and co-founder of Smart Elections. Carol, bring us up to date with this 21st century form of voter suppression that's going on through technology.
Hi, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I've learned so much. So I think I want to just start by taking a moment to really express gratitude for our process, that we have a democracy, that we have something that we are, fighting for, but that it is functioning to the extent that we're not at war with each other. I think it's so important to think about Gaza and what's happening there, and really keep in mind what the stakes are for our democracy to work. We see what happens when there is civil war and things really just break down. So I always, even though we're fighting and we are trying to make progress, I think it's so important to be grateful for what we have. And I also really encourage people to think about what we have in common, even with people that we have differences with. We don't want to demonize the other. At the end of the day, everybody hopefully is working for a fair election, and that keeping in mind that we're all human and that we all hopefully want our voices to be heard, I think helps us to stay compassionate toward each other and even toward people that we have differences with. So I'm Lulu Freistad. I am the co-founder and executive director of Smart Elections. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because some of the information I'm going to talk about tonight is a little technical, and I think it will help you just to have visuals. I also lead our action partner, Smart Legislation, and I'm hoping that I still have access to the chat. I'm going to go ahead and put into the chat the links to the articles that I'm going to talk about. And they already, I think, mentioned a few things. I'm a TEDx speaker. Before I was in advocacy, I was an election security journalist for about 10 years, and the investigations that I did received more than 4 million views online. Our work has been covered in a lot of different publications. I do mention that sometimes because I think there is sometimes a feeling that anybody talking about hacking or election technology is maybe just like, right wing or just moving in right wing circles with, not very evidence-based media, but we have been covered by mainstream media and our work is all evidence-based. And I want to talk about how election technology can really become a tool of voter suppression. And Andrea hinted at this a little bit in the beginning, but this goes very deep and there are really clear indications of how, in some cases, technology has in particular been targeted against communities of color. And that's what we're really looking at tonight. So the problems that I'm going to talk about include electronic voting machines and how they can sometimes actually lose votes, in particular in predominantly Black precincts. It's been documented I'm going to show you documentation from Georgia and from Tennessee that I think is going to blow your mind. And I want to talk about electronic poll books and how that can be very problematic in some cases, and evidence that we have of electronic poll books potentially being hacked, and also touchscreen voting machines, which can contribute to incredibly long lines, and how we want to try to stay away from those and, as much as possible, work with hand-marked paper ballots and assisted and accessible voting machines for voters who need them or want to use them. So let's talk about lost votes in Black communities. The first case I'm going to talk about is Georgia in 2018. And this is an article from The Root that talks about this case. It was researched by a wonderful organization, the Coalition for Good Governance, which is filing numerous lawsuits in Georgia right now, trying to address just some of the absolute disastrous parameters of Georgia elections. So this is kind of a really weird thing that happened, but it was pretty well documented by them. 2018 in Georgia, people really focused on Stacey Abrams' case and the governor's race. But in the lieutenant governor's race, there was this really weird thing that happened where in predominantly Black precincts, the number of people who just didn't cast a vote was remarkably high. It was around 4%, when normally it's under 1%. And they really dug down into this data. And this is from the Coalition for Good Governance report. And you can really see where the bar on the left, those are the predominantly Black precincts. And as you get into those precincts, the number of votes that disappeared, where people just didn't vote, got higher and higher. On the right, you have precincts with fewer Black voters, and on the left, more Black voters. And the more Black voters in the precinct, the more votes disappeared. And in fact, this was covered in the lawsuit this is an affidavit from Philip Stark, who's one of the top statisticians in the country. He said the chance of this happening by accident was actually less than 1 in a million. And then this is the most bizarre part of it. They actually found the particular voting machine, or one of the voting machines, where they think this problem emanated. There was a voting machine number 3 in the Winterville precinct. And the results there were literally just flipped. All the other voting machines in that precinct had a vote for the Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor. But on that machine number 3, the same percentage of votes were all for the Republican candidate, and the Republican candidate won only on voting machine number 3. So it looked like a really direct flip statistically, and there were actually eyewitness reports of voters seeing the votes actually flip as they were trying to vote. So we know this does happen. And I'm going to give you another example of a case, and this was Memphis, Tennessee in 2012. And in Georgia, I just want you to be aware of how many votes it was that were lost. It was a huge number of votes. It was 127,000 votes. That's a huge number of votes to be lost. So we're not talking about just a vote here or there. We are talking about huge swaths of votes that can completely change the outcome of an election. So a similar thing happened in Memphis in 2012. We have a lot more actual documentation about this because it was documented by Benny Smith, who's currently a Tennessee election commissioner. And he actually took a poll tape of the voting machine results in his in a precinct that he went to immediately after the voting was done at the close of polls. And you can see for one candidate there at the precinct that night, on election night, there were 548 votes for that candidate. But when the results were posted, officially, there were only 330 votes. So all these votes just disappeared. And these were electronic voting machines that basically had no paper record of the vote. And you can see all the way down the ballot, the votes just disappeared. 175 votes became 106, 88 became 51. And this turned out to be the case in 4 predominantly Black precincts. And the estimate is that about 1,000 votes were lost. And what's remarkable about this case is just how well documented it was. And there was a huge investigation. And one of the things that happened was the election administrator resigned after all of this came out. And this is a very strange thing, but in Memphis, Tennessee, that's Shelby County, which is a predominantly Democratic county, they had somehow mysteriously been electing white Republicans year after year after year. But after this election administrator resigned and there was a change of administration, in the next countywide race in 2018, 20 women were elected to office and 8 of them were Black women. So when that administration changed, we saw a drastic change in the election results. And it's something to really keep in mind. These technology issues can have very, very real consequences. So I just have about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to talk quickly about a couple other instances. There are very strange things that have happened sometimes with electronic poll books. This is a case in 2016, and the people who investigated this are fairly sure that this was an actual hack of the electronic poll books. This was in a very heavily Democratic county, Durham County, North Carolina. When voters came to vote that day, as they came to vote, the electronic poll book would show that they had already voted. And the voters would say over and over again, no, I haven't voted yet. I haven't voted yet. But the poll book would show that they had voted. And so there was kind of a huge scramble. They reverted to paper poll books, but they weren't prepared. They didn't have them. They were literally running to the copy center while hundreds and hundreds of people were waiting to vote. There were huge lines, a lot of people disenfranchised. And what wound up happening, this was 2016, North Carolina was supposed to be a neck and neck race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Donald Trump took North Carolina by, I believe, around 4 percentage points, four points, instead of it being tight. So Durham County was that county that was supposed to bring that state into the Democratic column, and it just didn't happen. And they think that's quite likely because of this electronic poll book hack. This is a weird one. I probably don't have time to cover it, but there's just a really weird thing that happened where the poll books printed out the wrong ballot for voters. And so voters were literally voting on the incorrect ballot, and there's no way you can recover from that. And then what Andrea hinted at also is that some of the worst voter suppression happens when counties adopt a touchscreen voting machine for all voters, instead of allowing voters who are able to fill out a ballot by hand, which is most voters have the ability to fill out pen and paper ballots. When counties don't allow voters to use pen and paper ballots, the lines can get ridiculously long, painfully long. In Georgia, we saw lines as long as 10 hours to vote in 2020, and in Texas, 7 hours to vote from these touchscreen voting machines. So what can we do? We definitely have solutions. You want to get informed, get involved, and advocate. And there's some basic principles. These are civil rights groups that are working with us. I'm in New York State, and we've been fighting one of these touchscreen machines. And Center for Common Ground has been with us at the forefront of that fight. We're so grateful to them. Center for Law and Social Justice, the Black Institute, Common Power, Justice Coalition USA, all civil rights groups that have really been involved in this fight for better election technology and very aware of this. So we encourage you to be aware of it also, and to get more informed about it. There's ways that you can do that. I'm going to give you the way to sign up for our mailing list in just a minute, and also my email. If you want to email me personally, I'm happy to stay in touch. Whenever possible, we encourage voters to use hand-marked paper ballots, which is just your basic pen and paper ballot. It's not an individual choice that you can make unless your county has provided pen and paper ballots. So sometimes that takes legislation. Sometimes you have to fight to get the right to have pen and paper ballots in every polling location. The Freedom to Vote Act, federal legislation, if we could get it passed, mandates that every polling place provide pen and paper voting Of course, you still have to make sure that voters with disabilities have accessible systems at all times. If you're looking for what type of voting machine your county has, verifiedvoting.org is a great tool. I'm going to make sure that this document is available to you. I'll put it in the chat afterwards. It has links to all of these articles if you want to research them further. Do not let the vote be encoded in a barcode. If your county is switching to voting machines that encode the vote in a barcode, fight against it. We just saw in Northampton County where the machines, they totally screwed up, and they were actually printing a different, they were printing different results for the voters than they were actually counting on the barcode. So you just don't want that. You can see I'm way over time. Participate in nonpartisan election observations, get on our mailing list. Smart Elections is going to be heading that up across the country in 2024, and have your county conduct audits and try to observe them. So I think that's what I have time for. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lulu. These are really disturbing facts and stories that you're bringing to us. And we are grateful for the very careful research, documentation, and take action opportunities that you're offering to all of us. And we'll be sharing these, everyone, in the thank you email. So don't worry, you're not going to, if you didn't get the links, don't worry about it. We're going to make sure you get the information you need. We've been talking about so many different forms of voter suppression, and now it's time to say, well, what else can we do? What can we do to fight back about that? And so I want to look at a couple of ways. One is how we build grassroots power, and the other is actions we can begin to take right now. And so I'm going to welcome back Noah Barron, our social justice organizer from the Workers' Circle, and Andrea Miller from the Center for Common Ground, who are going to be walking us through some next steps that you can take. Noah, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. So a democracy circle is a small group of people who join together regularly to fight voter suppression and demand the democracy that we need, a truly multiracial, multicultural democracy that represents all of us. Forming democracy circles is a way to build grassroots power for our democracy right where you live. Each democracy circle is started by a circle convener who picks a meeting time and a place and brings together people they know in person or on Zoom to take action and to explore how we counter attacks on our democracy right now. We provide all the resources and the training. You bring your passion, your values, and your people. Democracy circles build power by gathering and equipping the folks that you're already connected with. This is an adaptable model that can take the form you need and meet in a way that makes sense for you. So that could be around a kitchen table, after a protest, on Zoom, in a church basement, or in a coffee shop. Democracy circles are an entry point for people who want to do something about the loss of our rights and the erosion of our democracy. There are two main elements of a democracy circle: action and reflection. Democracy circles take action in all kinds of ways. Some write postcards or call voters of color in states with harsh voter suppression laws to make sure they can cast their ballots. Others recruit friends and neighbors to become nonpartisan poll monitors or join protests and rallies or make legislative visits. We provide a take action guide with a wide variety of actions that circles can take. And democracy circles also reflect together. We provide discussion resources to help democracy circles reflect and think about the state of our country. These discussion resources are constantly updated, and they include questions for discussion. Some resources are articles about legislation, history, or culture. Others are videos to watch. Some are poetry you can discuss, and some encourage you to share your own stories. And you don't need any previous experience to start a democracy circle. It's designed to be easy. When you sign up, you and I set up a time to talk, and I will walk you through all of it. We'll think together about what your circle will look like, and I'll hear about your ideas and your hopes for what your circle can do. Democracy circles build power and community. One of our Workers' Circle members and a Democracy Circle convener puts it like this: democracy circles allow us to share our ideas and feelings with other activists, be heard and hear others, get and give support, and have agency, not feel as helpless as we might in the face of rising fascism in this country. So if you're interested in learning more, we'll be dropping the link in the chat, and you'll also get it after this meeting. Go to circle.org/democracycircles, or you can email me directly at nbarron@circle.org. And you're also invited to join the Worker Circle and the Center for Common Ground for a virtual event, Build Power, Start a Democracy Circle, at 7 p.m. on January 18th. If you're looking for ways to take action right this second, we also encourage you to sign and share 2 petitions that we're going to drop in the chat right now. And I'm going to pass it off to Andrea, who will tell us about another way we can fight voter suppression right now.
Well, thank you very much, Noah. One of the other things that we can do to fight voter suppression, since so much of it is coming in the form of legislation, is you can, we're calling it, like some friends of ours have done for years, you can become a collectivist, meaning sign up, let us know, are you interested in voting rights? Are you interested in climate? Are you interested in voting rights and climate? And whenever we have a call to action, then we will send you the link where right from your computer, you can click and either email your legislators, all the legislators on a committee, state and or federal, or you can choose to learn how to become a citizen advocate. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat. I'm going to be doing a training on January 11th. I'm typing and talking, so it's taking me a moment. All righty, 11th, and that link is in the chat. I was a people's lobbyist on Capitol Hill from 2009 to 2019. And I'd like to think that in those 10 years that I spent on the Hill, getting people to co-sponsor legislation on jobs for all, Medicare for all, on removing the ratification deadline on the Equal Rights Amendment, and a score of progressive legislation opposing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that I might have picked up a couple of tips and tricks. So we will be talking to people about how to take letters that we will write for you and then deliver them to your local. You don't need to go to DC, or if it's state, you don't need to go to your state capital. Delivering those letters to your local officials. I know there's a bunch of you that belong to church organizations, you belong to civic organizations, you belong to protest organizations. When you get the letter, you sign it, get your friends to sign it, and then drop that letter right over to whoever your elected representative is and begin to build a relationship with them. So much of being a successful advocate is all about relationships. So let's build them with each other, and let's build them to build power with the people that we elected to represent us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you to all of our panelists and presenters tonight. Thank you to our co-sponsors. Thank you to all of you, the hundreds of you who have attended and who care so deeply about our democracy. We leave this time together tonight nourished by being together, equipped to understand and take the next steps to counter voter suppression, and committed to strengthening our democracy. Remember, we the people have the power. See you on the front lines. Good night.